Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into a case file that was just frozen solid for 23 years. It's quite something.
It really is. A case that, the standard methods just couldn't crack for decades.
Exactly. But it ended up being this, well, landmark example of forensic tech finally catching up, right?
It's absolutely a hidden killer brought to light.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to unpack all the sources we have on this decades-long cold case, Leslie Pryor's case. We're focusing on, I think, three key things.
Yeah.
First, the really brutal, minute details of the crime itself. Second, the killer's connection to the victim, which is quite chilling.
Very close.
And third, that huge scientific leap, the technology that finally identified Eugene Glegor.
It's a fascinating intersection of those elements.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're talking May 2nd, 2001, Chevy Chase, Maryland. You picture this place, right?
Yeah.
Affluent, quiet.
Typically very low crime. People feel safe there. Almost like a bubble.
Right. That sense of security just got shattered on Drummond Avenue. Leslie Pryor, 49 years old, didn't show up for work. That triggered a welfare check.
And that welfare check, well, that's really the start of everything, isn't it? Because what they found inside wasn't just a death scene. It immediately screamed violence. Personal violence.
Yeah.
And this case, it really becomes this incredible study in how forensic science has evolved. It shows exactly how someone the family knew, incredibly, could just vanish from suspicion for over 2 decades.
Ow. Just by staying off the radar.
Pretty much, not through some elaborate plan, just by avoiding the traditional DNA databases, living quietly.
So for you listening, the story arc here is, well, it's pretty stunning. We start with the crime scene, the awful details.
Mm-hmm. The brutality.
Then the investigation, which initially went down the wrong path. We'll get into
A
that.
common path, but yeah, wrong in this instance.
Then we pivot to the killer himself, his background, his relationship with the family, which is key.
Absolutely central to understanding how he evaded detection for so long.
And finally, the tech. That long wait for science to catch up. Not CODIS, not the usual criminal stuff.
No, this was different. This was about tracing family trees, genealogy, actually going halfway around the world to find a link.
Incredible. Okay, let's dive into section 1, the crime itself. All right, let's really unpack that initial discovery. May 2nd, 2001, authorities go into the Pryor home. What did they see?
Well, the sources, the police reports, they paint a picture of immediate, obvious struggle. This wasn't clean. It wasn't quiet.
Right, you mentioned signs of disturbance.
Yeah, significant disturbance. We're talking furniture scattered, overturned in the living room, and crucially, blood smears on the walls in different places.
Okay, so that suggests movement, a fight.
Absolutely. Mobility during the assault. It points to Leslie Pryor actively fighting back, maybe trying to get away, being pursued through her own home.
And the discovery of Leslie herself? Where was she found?
Tragically, she was found deceased in the shower, upstairs bathroom, a very private space.
And the cause of death wasn't straightforward, was it?
No, not at all. The medical examiner's report is stark. It wasn't a single blow or event. It was multiple blunt force trauma and strangulation.
Both. Why?
Both. And that combination, it tells you a lot about the level of violence, the rage involved, and frankly, the sustained intent of the person who did this.
The state's attorney, John McCarthy, he used some pretty strong language. He called it vicious.
He did a vicious crime. And he also specifically called it a slow death. That wasn't accidental phrasing.
What does that emphasis on slow death, especially with strangulation, tell us forensically?
Right.
About the attacker's mindset?
Well, strangulation, it's often seen as a very definitive indicator of intent. Unlike, say, a single strike in anger, strangulation requires continuous focused effort.
You have to maintain pressure.
Exactly, for minutes, potentially. Consciously cutting off air, blood flow, it's fundamentally different from a momentary loss of control. It implies deliberation or at least sustained rage aimed at causing suffering.
So McCarthy saying slow death really underscores that sustained intentional violence.
Precisely. It pushes it far away from any idea of an accident or a quick escalation. Legally, it points towards mens rea, the guilty mind, potentially premeditation.
Okay, so despite the horror and the eventual, 2-decade delay, the initial investigators in 2001, they did good work at the scene.
Immense credit is due there, yes. They were meticulous. They collected and preserved evidence that wouldn't even be fully usable with the technology of the day. But they had the foresight.
What kind of evidence are we talking about?
They secured male DNA from several places, those blood smears, other contact points. But the absolute linchpin, the most damning piece.
The DNA under her fingernails.
Exactly. DNA collected from under Leslie Prier's fingernails. You cannot overstate how significant that is.
Why is under so much more significant than just on?
Because DNA on a surface could theoretically be transferred innocently, although less likely in this context. But DNA under the fingernails? That's direct evidence of a fierce physical struggle.
She fought back hard.
Fiercely. In those last moments, she physically scratched her attacker, collecting his skin cells, maybe blood. It's undeniable proof of direct, violent contact. Evidence collected by the victim herself. Irrefutable.
So they had this killer's DNA profile right from the start. A perfect genetic fingerprint.
They did.
But no name to match it for 23 years. Which brings us to the initial investigation and why it stalled.
Right. So back in 2001, standard procedure, especially in a secure community like Chevy Chase with no sign of forced entry, well, the focus immediately goes to people closest to the victim, people with access.
A husband.
Almost automatically. Investigators honed in on Carl Sandy Prier. He became the primary person of interest, unofficially, for quite some time.
And that focus, while maybe a standard procedure, it cost time.
It absolutely consumed critical early resources. Now, Sandy Prier provided an alibi, and crucially, his DNA was tested.
Yeah.
No match. He was conclusively exonerated by the science, but the investigation had already spent valuable time and energy focused on him.
So while they followed protocol, the real killer, who was known, but maybe not immediate family.
Right. An acquaintance, someone slightly outside that innermost circle, was essentially left unexamined initially. He just slipped through the cracks while the focus was elsewhere.
And the tragedy of that delay. Sandy Prier passed away in 2017.
He did. He died never knowing who killed his wife, never seeing justice.
16 years living with that, even after being cleared. There must have been a shadow.
Absolutely. Imagine the emotional toll.
Yeah.
Unresolved grief, maybe suspicion from others. It's devastating for a family. Ken's daughter, Lauren Prier, talked about never giving up. But the cost of that weight? It's immense. It robbed them of closure for 2 decades.
Okay, this is where the story just takes such a sharp, unsettling turn. Away from the lab, towards psychology, betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
The killer,
Yep.
Eugene Theodore Glegor. At the time, 2001, he's just 20 years old.
A young man. And living right there in the area, Washington, D.C. Not some transient figure. He was part of the local fabric.
Hiding in plain sight, as they say.
Completely. And what makes this so deeply disturbing is his connection to the Prier family. It wasn't random.
No.
He wasn't a stranger breaking in. He knew them. He dated Leslie Prier's daughter, Lauren.
For how long?
For about 5 years, the sources say. Started around 1998, back when they were in high school.
5 years. So he was a fixture.
Absolutely. Described as well-known to the family. That implies he was in the house often, trusted, someone who wouldn't need to force entry.
That just reframes everything, doesn't it? The violence wasn't from an outsider. It was from someone they'd welcomed into their home, maybe shared meals with.
It's the ultimate betrayal, and it explains partly why he wasn't immediately suspected. He had a reason to be there, potentially. After the murder, he just blended back into the D.C. area.
Lauren Prier's reaction when she found out, described as unreal.
How could it be anything else? Discovering the person responsible for such trauma was someone you once cared about, trusted. It adds this horrific layer of psychological damage. It taints every memory.
So they eventually identify him. The who is solved. But the why, that remains a blank.
Frustratingly, yes. The sources are clear. A definitive motive for this level of extreme violence was never established. Glegor himself wouldn't provide one.
Why not?
Well, the prosecutors noted he was unwilling to admit his motive and the full extent of his horrific conduct. When you see that level of violence, the blunt force, the strangulation, and the perpetrator just clams up. It suggests a very deliberate effort to avoid full accountability, to not admit the intent behind it.
So instead of explaining why, he offered the blackout defense.
Yes, that became his core narrative during sentencing. It's a classic strategy in some ways.
What did he claim, specifically?
He claimed he struggled with drug and alcohol abuse around that time, leading to blackouts. His statement was very carefully worded, something like, "I vaguely remember leaving the Prier house in the morning, but the rest is a blur.
A blur.
I'm unable to remember and provide an explanation." See? He acknowledges being there, which he had to, given the DNA.
Right, the DNA under her nails.
But he denies conscious memory of the act itself. It's an attempt to negate the mens rea, the intent required for first-degree murder.
A way to plead to a lesser charge.
Exactly. It tries to create doubt about premeditation. But the prosecution pushed back hard. State's Attorney McCarthy stated flatly, "We believe he lacks remorse."
And the evidence itself seems to contradict the blackout, doesn't it? Strangulation.
Yeah.
That's not a blurry action.
It's a massive contradiction. How do you claim a total blackout during an action that requires sustained, focused physical effort over minutes? It doesn't add up.
So the blackout claim seems more strategic than genuine.
Deeply skeptical is how the legal system views such claims when the physical evidence shows focused intent. Strangulation is structured violence, not erratic, unconscious behavior. His refusal to offer any real explanation, even after being caught, just reinforces the view that he was minimizing his culpability. And that minimization, as we'll see, has consequences later on.
Okay, so we have this picture. Someone known to the family, capable of intense rage, leaves definitive DNA evidence, and yet walks free for 23 years. How? What protected him?
It really boils down to two main things: the technology gap back in the early 2000s and Gligor's own life choices after the murder.
Well, let's start with the tech gap. They had his DNA profile, right?
A complete profile, but here's the crucial part. His profile wasn't in the databases they used back then, primarily CODIS.
CODIS, that's the FBI's big national DNA database.
Exactly, Combined DNA Index System. But to get into CODIS, generally you need to be arrested or convicted of certain crimes, usually felonies.
And Gligor hadn't been.
Nope. After 2001, he apparently managed to avoid any felony arrests that would have required him to submit a DNA sample.
So he wasn't actively hiding, changing his identity.
No, it was passive evasion. He just lived a seemingly normal, non-criminal life right there in the D.C. area. He stayed under the radar of the system designed to catch repeat offenders, hiding in plain sight because his license plate number, his DNA, wasn't in the criminal registry.
Can we talk about that license plate number idea? For listeners maybe prepping for a meeting or wanting the technical bit, what's the difference between the DNA they had and what CODIS uses?
Great question. CODIS, especially back then, primarily uses short tandem repeats, or STRs. Think of them as, a short genetic license plate, maybe 13 to 20 specific locations on the genome that are highly variable between people. It's standardized for forensic comparison.
Okay, so you need a felony conviction to get your STR profile loaded.
Generally, yes. Gligor avoided that. So the DNA profile the police had from the crime scene, while complete, couldn't find a match in the system because Gligor's reference sample wasn't there.
So the delay wasn't because the 2001 detectives missed something.
Not at all. They did their job perfectly. They collected that genetic license plate. The problem was the system didn't have Gligor's car in its registry yet. It was purely a technological waiting game.
And you mentioned the importance of preservation earlier. That DNA sample had to survive all that time.
Absolutely critical. That DNA, under Leslie Preer's fingernails, the blood evidence, it had to be stored meticulously for over 2 decades. DNA degrades easily if not handled properly, temperature changes, contamination.
Right.
The fact that it was still viable and usable 20-plus years later is a testament to the Montgomery County Cold Case Unit's procedures. Without that pristine evidence, none of the later breakthroughs would have mattered.
So the evidence was waiting, patiently, for the science to evolve beyond just STRs and CODIS.
Exactly. It was waiting for forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG.
Which uses a different kind of DNA analysis.
Right. FGG relies on analyzing hundreds of thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. If STRs are the license plate, SNPs are like, huge chunks of the car's manual. Much more detailed.
And where does this SNP data come from, not criminal databases?
No, it comes from consumer genealogy databases, the ones people use voluntarily, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, GED Match, to find relatives or trace their heritage.
So people are uploading their own detailed genetic manuals.
And that creates this massive pool of data. FGG allows investigators, using crime scene DNA, if they can get an SNP profile from it, to find relatives of the perpetrator in these databases, second cousins, third cousins, even more distant ones.
Building a family tree to find the suspect.
Precisely. Gligor was safe only until FGG matured, and enough people had uploaded their DNA to these consumer sites to make finding a relative likely. It took about 2 decades for that ecosystem to reach critical mass.
Okay, so fast forward. The evidence is waiting, the tech is evolving. We get to around 2022. What happens?
The Montgomery County Police Department's Cold Case Unit makes a strategic move. They assign 2 new detectives, Tara Augustin and Allison Dupuis, specifically to apply these newer DNA technologies to the Preer case.
They decided to go for FGG.
Yes, they embraced investigative genetic genealogy. This was the pivot point.
So explain FGG again, how it works in practice. They have the crime scene DNA.
Right. They managed to get a usable SNP profile from that decades-old DNA, which is itself impressive. Then they upload that profile to one of the approved genealogical databases, like GEDmatch, that allows law enforcement searches under strict rules.
And they're not looking for Gligor himself because he probably never used these sites.
Exactly. They're looking for anyone in the database who shares significant chunks of DNA with the unknown profile from the crime scene. The amount of shared DNA, measured in something called centimorgans, or cm, indicates how closely related they are.
More centimorgans, closer relative.
You got it. Parent-child is thousands of CM siblings, too. First cousins share hundreds. It drops off, but even distant cousins, like fourth or fifth cousins, might share small but identifiable segments.
Though they got a hit.
They did. In 2024, the FGG analysis linked the crime scene DNA, but not to someone local. It linked to a distant relative living in Romania.
Romania. Wow. How does that even help find someone in D.C.?
That's where the genealogy part comes in. It's painstaking work. The Romanian relative is the genetic anchor point. From there, genealogists have to build a family tree.
Working backwards.
Backwards in time to find the common ancestor shared by the Romanian relative and the unknown suspect, and then forwards in time, tracing all the descendants of that ancestor down to the present day. You're looking for descendants who fit the profile, male, right age range, geographically plausible connection to the D.C. area in 2001.
That sounds incredibly difficult, especially with international records.
It is enormous work. Record gaps, name changes, immigration. But they did it. They traced the lineage and eventually narrowed down the likely family surname to Gligor.
Gligor. And that name rang a bell.
This is where old-school police work meets new tech. Perfect convergence. The FGG points to the Gligor surname. Detectives then search the original 2001 case files.
And they find that old note.
Exactly. Tucked away, maybe seemed insignificant at the time, was a mention of Leslie Prier's daughter having an ex-boyfriend named Gligor, Eugene Gligor.
Wow. Suddenly that old tip becomes red hot.
Instantly. The FGG result give it context and immense weight. Cross-referencing the genetic lead with the archival information allowed them to zero in specifically on Eugene Gligor after 23 years.
State's Attorney McCarthy called it history-making. Why was it such a landmark case for Maryland?
Because, as McCarthy confirmed, this was the first time in Maryland state history that familial DNA finding a relative, not the suspect directly, was successfully used through FGG to identify and ultimately prove a murder case. It validated the whole approach.
So FGG gives them Gligor's name. But that's still technically probability, right? They needed his actual DNA to compare directly to the crime scene.
Correct. FGG gets you the strongest possible lead, but for court, you need a direct match. They needed what's called a confirmatory sample from Gligor himself.
And he wasn't likely to just give one.
Definitely not. So they set up surveillance, Operation Surveillance. They tracked him to Washington Dulles Airport.
And this is the water bottle part.
This is the famous water bottle part. The investigators waited, watched, and when Gligor finished drinking from a water bottle and discarded it in a public trash can,
They retrieved it.
they did. And legally, this is crucial, it relies on the principle of abandoned property. Once you throw something away in a public place, you generally forfeit your expectation of privacy over it.
So they didn't need a warrant to collect the bottle or test the DNA on it.
Correct. His saliva, skin cells on the bottle, that
No.
was now fair game. They tested the DNA from the bottle.
And the result.
A positive match. Direct, irrefutable link. The DNA from the discarded water bottle matched the DNA recovered from under Leslie Prier's fingernails 23 years earlier.
That's it, the final piece.
The final piece. He was arrested in June 2024, first-degree murder charges.
Did he confess right away?
No. Sources say, despite that overwhelming forensic proof what the prosecutor called the most damning piece of evidence, Gligor initially maintained his denial during interrogation. It took months, likely after his lawyers saw the strength of the DNA evidence, for him to change his stance.
Okay, so Gligor's caught. The DNA is undeniable. After nearly a year of denial post-arrest, he faces the music. Let's talk about the legal outcome. He didn't go to trial for first-degree murder.
No, he didn't. In May 2025, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder.
Why the plea deal?
It's a very common outcome when the evidence is this strong. The sources call it overwhelming, irrefutable forensic evidence. The DNA basically guaranteed a conviction.
So the plea was about managing the sentence.
Exactly. Pleading guilty to second degree allowed Gligor to avoid the potential mandatory life sentence that often comes with a first-degree murder conviction, especially one involving strangulation, which implies that intent.
So he admits the killing, but not necessarily the premeditation. That ties back to the blackout claim.
It fits that narrative, yes. It allows him to take some responsibility while avoiding the harshest possible penalty. It's a calculated move for the defense. And for the prosecution, it secures a definite conviction, brings closure for the family, and avoids a potentially long, painful trial.
Okay, so the sentencing happened in August 2025. He's 45 years old by now. What sentence did he receive?
He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. That's followed by 5 years of supervised probation.
22 years. What does that mean for his time inside? What can we predict about his experience in the Maryland correctional system?
Well, given the extreme violence, the strangulation, the blunt force, he'll almost certainly start in at least medium security, maybe higher initially. His crime indicates a high risk level.
And will that blackout claim affect his time inside?
Oh, definitely. Because he used substance abuse as part of his defense, he'll absolutely be mandated into substance abuse treatment programs, probably cognitive behavioral therapy, too, to address the violence and decision-making.
Is that optional?
Not really. Successful completion of those programs is usually tied to institutional privileges, security level reviews, and critically, any future parole considerations.
Right, parole. That's the big question.
Huh.
Serving the full 22 years puts him at 67 upon release. When is he actually eligible for parole, and what are his real chances, given everything?
Okay, technically, Maryland guidelines might make him eligible somewhere around the 10 to 12-year mark, assuming perfect behavior inside. But, and this is a huge but, his chances of getting released that early are, frankly, extremely low.
Why so low? What are the barriers?
There are 3 big ones. First, just the sheer nature of the crime.
The brutality.
Exactly. Vicious, slow death, strangulation. Parole boards prioritize public safety above all else. Releasing someone early who committed such a focused, brutal act, that's a very hard sell. It screams high risk.
Okay, what's the second barrier?
His lack of accountability, that blackout defense, his refusal to explain why. Parole boards look for genuine remorse and taking full responsibility, claiming you don't remember the core details of such a violent act. That's seen as minimization.
Trying to downplay his role or intent.
Precisely. And minimization is a major red flag in risk assessments. The prosecutor's statement about him lacking remorse, that will be front and center in his parole file. It directly contradicts the idea that he's been rehabilitated.
So the very defense that maybe helped him get a 22-year sentence instead of life now tanks his parole chances.
It's a total catch-22 for him, yes. It demonstrates to the parole board that he hasn't fully confronted the causes of his violence. That makes him seem like an ongoing risk.
So putting it all together, the violence, the minimization, what's a realistic projection for his actual time served?
While he might be eligible around 10, 12 years, realistically, he's likely looking at serving significantly more. Probably somewhere in the 15 to 18-year range seems much more plausible.
If he means release in his early 60s, not his mid-50s.
Correct. He'll serve a substantial portion of that 22-year sentence. The lack of expressed remorse is a very heavy anchor.
And even when he does get out, he's not totally free. There's that probation.
Right. 5 years of mandatory supervised probation immediately upon release. That's intensive oversight.
What does that involve?
Regular check-ins, required counseling or treatment, holding down a job, maybe geographic restrictions, and absolutely zero contact with the Preer family. That will be ironclad.
And if he messes up during those 5 years?
Any significant violation, failed drug test, missed appointment, getting anywhere near the family means probation is revoked and he goes straight back to prison.
To serve the rest of the original 22 years?
Potentially, yes. He remains under the system's control, effectively, until he's well into his 70s if he can't comply with the rules upon release. #tag@outro.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the Leslie Preer case, it's really more than just solving one crime, is it? It feels like a lesson.
A powerful one.
For you, the listener, I think the biggest takeaway is about that idea of forensic integrity, like you said.
Yep.
Cold cases can be solved even decades later, but only if that initial evidence is collected and preserved perfectly.
Absolutely. That's the foundation.
And the second takeaway, technology like FGG has basically slammed the door on the loophole that protected guys like Ligor, the passive evaders. Just staying out of trouble isn't enough to hide anymore.
It really isn't. And legally, this case sets a huge precedent. It validates this whole combined strategy, FGG, digging through old files, smart surveillance like the water bottle. Courts have accepted it.
So this model is being used elsewhere now?
Oh, yeah. Across the country. It's giving hope to countless families waiting for answers in other cold cases. That initial evidence, collected years ago, might finally find its match.
Which brings us to our final thought, something for you to chew on. We talked about how FGG traced Gligor's DNA to a relative in Romania.
Mm-hmm. Across the globe.
So think about this. If someone avoids CODIS, stays off the criminal radar, are they really safe if their third or fourth cousin, living in another country entirely, decides to upload their DNA to find out about their family history?
It raises profound questions, doesn't it?
What does this global reach of familial DNA searching mean for privacy, for everyone? If your distant relative's spit test can potentially link you to a crime scene, where do we draw the line?
How do we balance this incredibly powerful crime-fighting tool against personal genetic privacy in a world where data crosses borders so easily?
It's a huge ethical and legal puzzle, and we're really just starting to figure it out. Something to think about.
A fascinating dilemma indeed. Thanks for exploring it with us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.